72 people on payroll. That is surprising to a lot of people. They think there's 4 or 5 scientific robots down there in like one little building. We're actually a quite large and vibrant research facility. We're world famous in both the field station world and in aquatic research. So there's water scientists around the planet in Switzerland and Australia and South Africa that know us really well. But you walk in Polson or Kalispell and talk to someone and they're like, science station, huh? So I enjoy sharing about what we do and our wonderful team. So we've got Yellow Bay Point right there, and like I said, about 60 buildings. All right, so we've been running field ecology classes since 1899. We are the longest running program of our type that we know about. And our founder, Morton Elrod, arrived in Montana in 1897. He was UM's first professor of biology. He started exploring western Montana, and within 2 years, he had said, oh my gosh, this place is amazing. We need to study it, understand it, protect it for the future, and he established the biological station within 2 years. Within 15 years of establishing the biological station, Elrod had brought students to the Flathead from over 30 different states. And I think about this because this is real, but a young woman gets on a train in New York City, takes the train across country to Missoula, gets on a stagecoach or actually not to Missoula, to Ravalli, gets on a stagecoach in Ravalli to Polson, and then hops on a steamship and gets dropped off at the biological station for a summer of classes. So the East Shore Road wasn't built until after World War II, so it was pretty rugged and challenging to get to the biological station. But this summer class announcement from 1903, and you can see some of the early students taking our classes. You can see that students dressed up back then. Our students today do not wear feathered hats and petticoats and three-piece woolen suits. We can barely get them to wear long pants and closed-toed shoes to enter our laboratories. We still run our class program, and it's an incredible opportunity when you're studying the natural environment to be out in it. And you can learn a lot more by immersing yourself in the natural world than you can listening to some stuffy guy give a PowerPoint presentation and a button-down shirt. But Flathead Lake is our classroom, Glacier Park, Down the Swan, Bison Range, Mission Mountain, Mission Valley. So we take our students all over this watershed, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 plus, for really intensive hands-on experiences. Only about a third of our students come from UM, 2/3 come from all over the nation and all over the world. So it's really great for us to be bringing people to the Flathead from all over. And the students learn from each other. They're from different geographic areas, socioeconomic backgrounds, and so they're learning from each other in addition to learning from this place and the classes and our instructors. So Instagram and Twitter tweets, I guess. One of my favorites I've taken in Montana, so blessed to call this my classroom. Here's to the summer of a lifetime. So we really blow students' minds. And for many of these students, it's their first time in Montana. For some of them, it's their only time in Montana. But there is a subset like myself that come here for summer classes and realize that this is it and never leave. So yeah, we're adding to the population here in Valley. We've been studying Flathead Lake since 1899. One of the first things that our founder, Morton Elrod, did was explore around the lake and learn about the creatures and the place. So this is 1902, a biological reconnaissance of Flathead Lake. We're so fortunate to have that early data and that early science so we can compare to what's going on today. And down here, I enjoy this factoid. Elrod had the first gasoline-powered boat on Flathead Lake. It's called the Missoula. It was actually funded through philanthropic contributions from the city, community members in the city of Missoula. But when he had his first gasoline-powered boat, people thought he was nuts. They thought this was a passing fad because it was the era of steamships. And steamships plied the lake, and this tiny little gas engine on this tiny little boat, no one thought it would stick. Well, where are the steamships today, right? Pretty much all gasoline-powered boats out there on the lake today. Our science and understanding of the lake continues through today. A few more modern photos. Flathead Lake used to freeze. We used to drill holes through the ice to sample in the winter. One of the benefits of having a long-term place-based research station like the biostation is long-term data and information about a place. Our records show that Flathead Lake used to freeze once a decade. Flathead Lake hasn't frozen since the winter of 1989-90. So something's different. It's not freezing once a decade anymore. I, as associate director, now help run the place and keep a functional platform for all of our activities. I used to go outside, just proof of that. See? We sometimes have celebrities out on the boat. Fortunately, we had to fire Monty. He contaminated the samples with his paws. Those didn't work out. He's got another gig though. And then this graphic here shows that we've got a long-term monitoring program going back to the 70s, and we recently published a paper with data going back 40 plus years, and that is showing that phosphorus, the nutrient in Flathead Lake that would turn Flathead Lake green if we saw an increasing trend, has basically been stable. So Flathead Lake is as clean today as it was 30, 40 years ago. And that's really unique for lakes. Most lakes are getting polluted with nutrients and other contaminants. Flathead Lake is not. And that's due to society's investment in keeping Flathead Lake clean because we care about it and it benefits us. All right, we've always had laboratories. We've always been kind of at the cutting edge of science, even in this really rural and remote place compared to where most scientific research is done. But we started in downtown Big Fork, and from 1899 to 1909, we rented property and buildings from Everett Slider, the original Everett Slider, whose family now runs Slider Hardware. He started the town of Big Fork. Officially, the town began in 1901. But we were there in 1899, so I like to joke with my friends from Big Fork that we predate the town of Big Fork. But that little cabin there, this is a picture of the inside of the original log cabin laboratory at the biological station. Then, when we moved to Yellow Bay in around 1910, we built our first brick laboratory. These were handmade bricks that were barged across the lake from Summers, and the building was completed in 1912. You can see the interior of the laboratory there. That lab was damaged beyond repair by an earthquake in the 1950s. And when you were building hand-built brick buildings in the early 1900s, you didn't use rebar and supporting materials. So here on the East Shore, we're on the Mission Mountain Fault, and we get little rumblers all the time. But the one in the 1950s was significant. I think it was a 5.8, something like that. Today, we have a state-of-the-art research laboratory that was built in the early 1980s. It's actually named after Leland Schoonover, who was a Polson school teacher, Polson legislator, and very dedicated to protecting Flathead Lake. He was a real leader of that era in acknowledging that keeping the lake clean would benefit society and the economics of our region. And so our lab is named after him. We have an amazing team there that do a lot of analytical analyses, and we use our lab to analyze samples from the lake, but our lab basically operates as a small business as well. We do work for clients from from MSU, from all over the region. Our lab, because Flathead Lake is so clean, we specialize in detection of things at very, very low levels. We detect things in water that other labs can't. And so if you are in a place with extremely low conductivity, low nutrients, low pollution, you would send your samples to us because that's what we're set up to do, and we're famous in our field for having a real high quality of work. We can't run an Iowa hog farm stream sample through our lab equipment. It would contaminate it. The nutrient levels are really high. We use totally different techniques, but for extremely low detection of things in water, we are very successful and known in our field. All right, I mentioned Morton Elrod, our founder. Elrod did a lot of things. He was kind of a renaissance man of his time. He was an avid photographer back when you carried your camera on a horse with big glass plates. So fortunately, he documented a lot of the development and settlement of western Montana. He lived in Missoula, taught in Missoula, but he was up at the biological station. But he also worked in Glacier Park. He played a role in the creation of Glacier. He'd already been up there exploring, knew that it was amazing. But then he was Glacier's first naturalist. He wrote Glacier's first guidebook. He did the first science that came out of Glacier. And he took a lot of pictures of Glacier in the early years to that have been used to document conditions back then. We still work in Glacier regularly. The Park Service doesn't really have the bandwidth or funding to do scientific research. They're really in the business of managing people at this point in time, so they will periodically call us in to do water quality studies. We're wrapping one up on McDonald Lake right now. Our director, Jim Elser, he's got a project in the high country of Glacier Park in what we call new lakes, brand new lakes that are forming as the glaciers melt and recede. So these lakes in that upper row, they've only been around for 5 or 10 years. They don't have names. One of them's Lake X, one of them's Lake Y, one of them's called Ghost Lake because it's shaped like Casper. And as a biologist, it's really fun and exciting to get up into brand new ecosystems and see what's there and how frequently new things get there. And so it's an exciting opportunity to look at these brand new lakes of Glacier. I mentioned Elrod took photos early on, so that one's 1926. The U.S. Geological Survey has done a lot of repeat photography using Elrod photos as the then and the now photos. You can see there's a lot less ice from that same location as there was previously. All right, I mentioned briefly that we have 80 acres and 60 buildings. Many of those buildings are lodging. We can actually sleep 110 people at the biostation today. That wasn't always the case. Early on, we had wall tents to house our students. I like this one. This is from the late teens. That's a floating dormitory. And with the housing crisis that we have today, I think we should bring back floating dormitories. Today, we've got 40 cabins that we use for students and workshop participants. We also have year-round housing with a dorm and apartments as well. So most people don't know we can house 110 people. Our workshops and conferences have to be educational, research, or academic. We don't do family reunions, we don't do weddings, and we're thrilled about that. University of Montana has another field station called Lubrecht Experimental Forest, and they do family reunions and weddings, and they make a whole bunch of money, and they hate it. So we don't have to deal with Groomzilla, we don't have to deal with the drunk idiot that tries to burn the place down every night. We have wonderful guests who are often scientists or folks from nonprofits, artist retreats, writing workshops, you name it, we host that kind of thing. So we also have a cabin sponsorship program to help fund our physical plant. 80 acres, 60 buildings, 40 employees, and UM's investment in our campus and physical plant is $0.0. So we have to be entrepreneurial, we have to generate revenue. So I'm a river ecologist by training. I run a hotel and restaurant business on the side, so we can pay the light bills, the insurance premiums, fix broken windows, buy nails, lumber, and all that stuff. I think it's kind of ironic. We're this world-famous scientific institution. We've got 125 years of accomplishment, and these days our beds are our most valuable thing here in the Flathead. All right. Many people don't know, but Yellow Bay State Park is also on biostation property. Yellow Bay has been a site of recreation for 125 years, and in the 1940s, the state legislature decided that the public should have access to the lake on state property, and so I found this. This is the original hand-drawn map of Yellow Bay State Park in the legislative document that created the park. We're really excited because Yellow Bay State Park is undergoing a significant upgrade. Folks may know, but Flathead Lake has an erosion problem, and Yellow Bay State Park has taken the brunt of that. And there used to be a road and a campground in Yellow Bay State Park, but that's all eroded into the lake. We had a faculty member for many years, Mark Lorang, who studied shoreline erosion, and he documented in one fall weekend of heavy winds, 9 linear feet of shoreline erosion. So it can happen fast when the wind direction is perfectly wrong for a particular site. So just this past spring, we worked with the state to build an erosion control beach. When waves hit hard structures like seawalls, the waves bounce off or run down the seawall and erode someplace else. Seawalls don't stop erosion. but beaches do. When a wave breaks on a beach, it moves the gravel and the cobble, and the wave energy dissipates. And so the station's been promoting and working with a number of partners on building erosion-controlled beaches since 2000, 1999, something like that. So there's now a enormous improvement at Yellow Bay State Park, where there's an erosion-controlled beach that makes most of the shoreline now accessible for recreationists. There is more planned for Yellow Bay State Park. There's a very basic schematic drawing of what Parks is going to do in the next few years. But last 2 legislative sessions, Parks got funding to upgrade Yellow Bay State Park. In my mind, that's basically as close to a miracle as you can get. So folks love Yellow Bay State Park. People often call it this hidden secret, and unfortunately it was recently just named one of the 8 greatest lakeside beaches in the U.S. So the secret is out if you read the internet. And interestingly, it came out as one of the greatest lakeside beaches before we more than doubled the beach with the Spring Erosion Control Beach Project. All right. As a scientist, you're always keeping track of new innovation and new technologies, and we've been involved with this our whole time at the station. In the 1950s, one of those new scientific innovations was radioactivity. In hindsight, we now know that there are concerns with radioactivity, but after World War II in the 1950s, radiation was this brand new field, and the biostation was one of 12 U.S. entities to study and promote the use of radiation in education. So we've got some radiation scientists and educators there from the 1950s. We still use radioactive elements in our research, carbon-14. It's a non-harmful one, but we're able to track the uptake of carbon through a biological community because it is slightly radioactive. An area that we are at the leading edge today is environmental DNA, being able to detect species from the environment by detecting their DNA. So we can pull a net through Flathead Lake, and then what is captured in the net, we can take that to our genetics lab, and we can run analyses to see what's in the water of Flathead Lake. Detection of aquatic invasive species is very important to catch them early, and environmental DNA detection helps you with that. And so our lab can detect 1/10 of one cell, and that gives us the opportunity to detect things that have arrived in Flathead Lake long before we've ever actually caught an organism. All right. This is a story that you in Polson may know, but been a lot of stories over the years about the Flathead Lake monster and suspicion that it is a sturgeon. And geographically, sturgeon are very close. They're in the Kootenai watershed. They're just over into Idaho as well, and other headwaters of the Columbia Basin. But in the 1950s, an organization called Big Fish Unlimited of Polson offered a contest with prize money to anyone who could catch a sturgeon in Flathead Lake to prove their existence. It was actually a economic angle to get more people to come to Polson. So I don't know if there was a Polson chamber back then, or if they were involved with Big Fish Unlimited, but they wanted to drive more commerce and more people coming to Polson. And a local fisherman caught a 180-pound sturgeon and brought it in and claimed the prize money. That's where the controversy begins. So there's speculation that he drove to Idaho and caught the sturgeon and brought it back in a pickup truck full of ice. And the sturgeon was displayed. This is a picture of the actual sturgeon. It's at the Polson Museum just in downtown. The actual sturgeon, which is now run by the one of the descendants of the Big Fish Unlimited sponsors. But you could go to the Salish Hotel and adults could spend a quarter to see this gigantic sturgeon. Kids, they just charged a dime. So it was a revenue generating scheme, and also people wanted to dispel the myth and prove that there was sturgeon. So this is where the biostation gets involved. So there was controversy about whether the sturgeon was actually from Flathead Lake or not. The guy who caught the fish got in a lawsuit with the sponsors of the competition. And so the biostation was brought in to look at the fish and determine if it came from Flathead Lake or not. And the way that they did that was they examined the stomach contents. And if there were fish parts and food in this sturgeon stomach that existed in Flathead Lake, then it could be from Flathead Lake, but if there were pieces and parts from other parts of the U.S., then it wasn't from Flathead Lake. And so Royal Brunson, our fisheries biologist at the time, examined the fish, wrote a little brief report in 1957, examined the stomach content, and the results were inconclusive. So there may still be a Flathead Lake monster out there. I suspect it's not a dinosaur, but it certainly could be a sturgeon. There are native accounts of sturgeon in the lake. There are old-timer accounts of sturgeon in the lake. Actually, one of the names for Flathead Lake is Flathead Lake because the Kootenai people called sturgeon the fish with the flat head. So mystery is out there. I'm glad the mystery's out there, because if we knew everything, this world would be boring. All right, education, K through 12 education and teacher engagement. A lot of our early students in the early 1900s were teachers, and actually about 75 to 80% of our students were female in the early 1900s because many of them were teachers. And so we've engaged teachers and taught them biology and ecology since our beginnings. In the 1960s, we had multiple years of National Science Foundation grants to bring biology teachers from the Rocky Mountains to the biological station to train them up on biology. So there's a whole cohort of mostly retired biology teachers at this point in time around the western U.S. who spent summers at the biological station. And I love when they reach out because I hear their stories. And one guy reached out. He was the head of the biology curriculum and wrote the biology textbook for the state of Idaho. And he spent 2 or 3 summers at the biological station. 10 years ago or so, he was retiring. He reached out. He shared all kinds of stories about his time at the biological station. We now have a formal K through 12 education program. We used to engage a handful of schools, just teachers that we knew, but since about 2017, we have a formal K through 12 education program. We are overwhelmed with demand, which to me indicates that it's a good idea. But we certainly host groups regularly from Polson School System, Ronan, Pablo. We also regularly host groups from Boys and Girls Club of the Flathead Reservation. And when I kind of got involved with our K through 12 education program, I learned something that I didn't know about, which was that a primary obstacle for most schools to have field trips is bus money. Most teachers get 1 or 0 field trips, and $250 is all that stops a school from going to the biological station or Glacier Park or the bison range. And so we have a board member who acknowledged that this was a challenge, and so she set up a fund where we actually will pay for the bus transportation now for the students to get to the biostation. Our goal is for every student in the Flathead watershed to be engaged by biostation science, biostation educators, and to be learn about and become excited and passionate about this amazing place and the lakes and the waters that are around here. For me, this program is particularly poignant because that's Finley. Finley, a few years ago, his school came to the biological station for a field trip and had a great old time. And Finley School is one of those schools, they wouldn't have been able to come on a field trip to the station if we weren't able to provide the funding for the bus transportation. So it's personal. All right, I mentioned we've been monitoring conditions of the lake for a long time. We've got a formal monitoring program, scientifically rigorous protocol that we put in place in the 1970s, 1977. The lake at that time was starting to show signs of deterioration from human nutrient pollution. Some of it from non-functional septic systems, some of it from old sewage treatment plants that weren't modern technologies yet. That's what a polluted lake can look like. We don't want our lake to turn green. We want it to stay clear and blue. But we also put the monitoring program in place because in the 70s, large-scale coal mining was proposed in the headwaters of Flathead Lake in southeastern British Columbia and southeastern BC. About a 4-hour drive from the Flathead generates about 40% of the world's steel-making coal. And there are some coal seams in the Flathead watershed, but the existing mines are all in the Kootenai watershed. And all that mine waste flows down and enters Montana and Lake Kootenai. But the mines were proposed on the Flathead side of the mountains, and the biostation, people like Leland Schoonover, the tribes, government, non-governmental organizations got together and fortunately stopped the mines from happening, because people on both sides of the border recognized that a healthy Flathead Lake had more value, both ecological value and economic value, than 20 years of coal mining in Canada. So the mines were proposed in the 70s, the biostation and partners stopped in the 80s. More mines were proposed in the 2000s, the biostation and partners stopped in the 2000s. More mines were proposed in the 2010s. And so one of the roles the biostation plays is a continual sentinel and watchdog of preventing our lake from being degraded by human activity, including large-scale mining in Canada. So we've got this wonderful long-term record of Flathead Lake's conditions. A scientific tool that we use is called a Secchi disc. It's basically a black and white plate. You lower it down into the water until you can't see it anymore. The deeper in the water you can see it, the clearer that water is. So it is a measure of water clarity. And we've been doing these Secchi depth readings back to 1977. And there's a whole bunch of noise and different dots on that graph, but Flathead Lake's clarity changes annually, naturally. When the runoff is happening, the rivers are muddy, they bring that sediment into the lake. That's a natural phenomenon. We can actually watch what we call the sediment plume enter Flathead Lake up near Big Fork at the river mouth, and then work its way down the west shore of the lake and then circle back up the east shore. We have satellite imagery where we track what we call the sediment plume. So that's why we have some of these really shallow readings. So that's the surface of the lake, and that's the depth into which you can see. And Flathead Lake, on average, you can see about 10, 12 meters into Flathead Lake, 35, 40 feet. That's extremely clear. So here are Flathead Lake readings between 10 and 15 meters. Here are readings from 13,000 other readings from lakes around North America. So we are definitely at the tail end of some of the cleanest waters out there with data. The blue line is really cool because that shows that there is no real trend. If anything, visibility into the lake is getting deeper, and Flathead Lake is basically as clear today or clearer today than it was in 1977. That is a remarkable feat. Most lakes are cloudy and brown and green from nutrient pollution. Globally, our lakes are deteriorating. Flathead Lake is not. And a lot of that has to do with society's investment in protecting this lake and nutrient reduction measures and not allowing bad development to happen, all while allowing our economy to thrive. All right, our monitoring program also detected changes in the biological community. I've got a whole talk about the mysis shrimp story, so I'm not going to get into that today, but the arrival of non-native species into Flathead Lake has changed our biological community dramatically. So we've got some of the clearest water on the planet, but we have one of the most disturbed biological communities, largely through intentional introductions of non-native species. Because that's what you did in the early 1900s up through the 1960s. You got to new water body, you put new fish and new fish food in there to make it better. Well, society now values native species, and we've seen the unintended consequences of introducing things all willy-nilly. So if anyone's really interested in the shrimp story, I have a one-pager that breaks it down. But like I said, no time for that story today, but a very, very famous scientific story. It's in textbooks of good intentions gone awry. All right, I mentioned zebra and quagga mussels briefly. We are filled with non-native species in the lake, and we really don't want new ones to arrive, especially the bad ones. These zebra quagga mussels, if they were to get established in Flathead Lake, would change the lake forever. They are filter feeders, and they can eat 80% of the food in a water body. So if they got to Flathead Lake and they eat 80% of the food, there's not a lot left for other species to go around. Lake Michigan, one of the Great Lakes, 75% of all the biomass of Lake Michigan today are zebra and quagga mussels. That means someone who grew up fishing Lake Michigan 50 years ago, there's 75% less fish in that lake because the mussels are monopolizing the resources and eating the food. So the biostation, we are constantly on watch, trying to find the invasive species before they arrive. We have 30 sites around the lake. We work with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We work with Flathead Lakers. We work with Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes to sample those 30 sites 3 times a year, midsummer, late summer, and fall, looking for the baby mussels. and we have not detected any. We've been doing this since 2016, rigorously like this. It's entirely funded philanthropically by the community around Flathead Lake that care about this wonderful place. All right, we also have a natural resource economist on our team, which for a biological station might be a little bit odd for some, but I give a lot of talks. I talk to chambers, I talk to county commissioners, and an angle that gets a lot of response and interest is the economic benefits of a healthy ecosystem where we live in. And so our natural resource economist did a study a few years ago showing that the clean waters of Whitefish and Flathead Lakes increase property values by $2 to $3 billion. Did you hear that right? We all benefit, whether we have shoreline property or not, we all benefit from the clean waters of Flathead Lake. This is a very desirable place to live, whether you can afford shoreline property or not. My home doubled in value over COVID. I'm 40 minutes away from the lake, but still, I got the bump of that as well because we're so desirable. If our lakes start deteriorating and turning green and brown, they're less desirable. Market forces take over. Property value, what people are willing to pay goes down. So keeping Flathead blue and clean benefits all of us that have pocketbooks, that have jobs, that have businesses, that have property. The flip side of that is when you get a new invasive species, property values go down as well. And so Nanette Nelson, our natural resource economist, she did a study for the state showing that if we got invasive mussels widespread throughout Montana, it would cost Montana $200 million a year in lost tourism revenue and the cost of mitigation, getting those mussels out of irrigation canals, getting them out of municipal water supply pipes. That doesn't include property values. Our estimate is that if we got mussels widespread throughout Montana, the property values could decrease by about $500 million. Not chump change, and this gets the attention of county commissioners. Lake County understands that Flathead Lake is the golden goose. Flathead County, not as much. They've got to make sure and like. All right, so all along throughout our history, we've been engaging members of the public, and this shot's from the early 1900s. It's a community day in Yellow Bay. You can see all kinds of boats and floating dormitory, but that jumps out at me. That's a homemade seaplane from 1900 something. That's remarkable to me. I will fly in airplanes, but I've got a couple of rules. I won't fly in a homemade airplane. And then a few years ago, I didn't know about this, but there are private submarine groups out there. And we hosted a group of private submariners who pick a different lake every summer to go explore. We had submarines from back east, like outside DC, from Alberta, from California, from Texas, and they were offering rides. And my other rule is I will not go in a homemade submarine. Some of our team did, but I didn't want to go there. 1950, we had a Visitors Day, and then some of you have already come up to me and said, oh gosh, I missed their open house. Well, last Friday we had our 125th anniversary open house celebration. Every year we'll have an open house and we set up displays, we take people out on our boat, we have presenters. It's usually the first week of August, like absolutely everything else that happens in Flathead summer. So, open house this year is passed, but we'll have one next year. And like I said, you are welcome to come visit the biological station because it is an amazing place and it is your biological station. So, a few inspirational quotes up here. I was inspired to become a scholar by my biostation experience. It shaped my life. The whole class was an aha moment. So we're making hay out of our 125th anniversary, engaging the community, sharing what we do. And also wanted to point out that a number of businesses in Polson and Polson Chamber numbers are supporters and friends of the biological station. So that's what I have for you today. I'm happy to field any questions before you head back to your businesses and do your own jobs. Yes?
So you said the University of Montana doesn't financially support you?
They don't. We get 20% of our budget from UM, but none of that goes to our campus. So they pay for about 8 of our 34, 35 employees, mostly our director and our faculty. But most of our team members are what we call soft money. They're paid from grants and projects that they work on. So So 20% of our funding comes from UM, 40% of our funding comes from research grants and projects and research contracts. 30% of our funding comes from our philanthropic community. So I'd like to point out to UM that the Flathead Lake community invests more in the biological station than the university and the state do. I try that shaming approach, hasn't resulted in anything yet. And then about the remaining 10% is our own activities, our laboratories, our food, our conference center, hotel, restaurant. And then we have summer classes as well, and they're financially self-sustaining. UM cut funding for those about 20 years ago. And so we negotiated with them that we do everything. We market, recruit, we receive the money, we keep the money, and pay the expenses of the classes. So in a way, we're kind of an assemblage of small businesses. We've got those laboratories as well that do fee-for-service work for clients. So yeah, I'm a river ecologist, but I happen to have a dual biology and economics background. So I guess I was the one there most suited to engage in the business activities of the station.
So I guess the reason why I asked that is, I worked on an estate last year that the guy made a very large donation to the U of M Foundation,
Yep.
specifically for the biological solution.
Well, that's fantastic.
So through the foundation, you receive funds.
So the UM Foundation is our charitable fiscal agent, and so they hold funds for all units of UM, basically in different accounts. And so if you work with the foundation and that gift is designated towards the biostation, then the foundation will hold it in one of our funds that have a specific criteria. A lot of people like to invest in our lake monitoring program because it's the lake that's special to them, that is near and dear in their heart. A lot of folks choose to give to scholarship opportunities so students can take our classes. More than half of our students get philanthropic scholarships to attend our programs. Some people like bricks and mortar. So yes, so thank you for working on that. We appreciate that. Yes.
Can I ask you, how many school kids do you get a year that are local? And how much do you feel that the bus funds are impeding on that?
Post-COVID, we're getting over 1,000 students a year to the biological station. And I'd say probably a third of those groups request bus funding. Some schools even request funding to cover the substitute teachers while the real teachers are at the biological station. By far the biggest expense for our K-12 program is the teachers, the educators, our education staff. People are the most expensive. But it's great to be able to help out the teachers in the schools and with funding for field trips. And I'd say about 90% of those students that visit are from the Flathead watershed. So, Hot Springs, Arlee, we get Missoula and Big Sky sometimes, but mainly it's pulsing through Kalispell.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yes.
First of all, Don, thank you for what you do. You mentioned that Flathead County doesn't really prioritize this as much as Lake County does. How much influence do you have over the inflow of water from Flathead County, primarily with so much agricultural land along the river?
The inflow of water, we have no management authority at all. We're basically just the scientific experts that people consult with regularly. So, to me, science in a file cabinet doesn't benefit society very much. And so one of the aspects of the station's history I'm proud of is regularly engaging the decision-making arena. Our former director, Jack Stanford, was regularly talking with elected officials and county commissioners about the benefits of the lake. And so I'm really proud of our willingness to engage the fray. For most scientists, they don't want to go there because their end goal is to publish a scientific paper that nobody reads. Certainly not the decision makers like state senators and county commissioners. So our goal is for the decision makers to have the best available information. Doesn't mean they make the best decisions with that information, but at least we've presented it to them and have given them the opportunity to use that information. But there's a watershed group that used to be called the Flathead Basin Commission. Now it's expanded to be the Western Montana Conservation Commission, and there are county commissioners from Flathead and Lake counties that have seats on that. And so there's quarterly meetings, our director Jim Elser has a formal seat on that, Fish, Wildlife and Parks, Forest Service, business interests. And so we're regularly at the table discussing what we know about our ecosystem, especially related to the waters, and how different management decisions would influence those, and the benefits that we get from a healthy ecosystem. Kind of get at your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Tom. Really appreciate it.